Why is this wrong? I'll tell you why. So, the Swedish never actually shot at a T-80U. Instead, what they did is this thing called Svenskt Skid. And you'll see this coming up. Svenskt Skid is called Swedish protection. What they did is they built a model what they believed was the T-80U and shot at it. Now, generally, this isn't an issue, right? This generally isn't a problem when it comes to finding out ballistic reports or finding out ballistic protection. The problem is, if you look at the trials that they did with the T-80, it has literally nothing to do with its armor. It's all about mobility. This is the official document, as you can see, 19th of the 11th, 1993, and they compared it to the Strv 104, which was the tank that they were using at the time. It makes sense to do that, right? And it found that it blew the Strv 104 out of the water. But you know what it didn't do? They compared it to the Leopard 2A4 and the M1A1 from 4 years earlier. Since the T-80U is, an 80s era tank, the M1A1 and the Leopard 2A4 blew it out of the water. The only thing the T-80U had over them was acceleration. Everything else was worse in the T-80U. So they didn't test its armor. They didn't test its gun. What they did was test its maneuverability and its mobility through the place. And you can actually see this. Here's the M1A1 and the Leopard 2. And here is the T-80 in Boden 1994 Forsock running around. They didn't test its damn armor. What they did was they made a replication of what they thought was the armor, because they never took it apart. This is how close they got, not fully taking the damn thing apart, and tested it based on that. Which is why the next slide says a simulation of the T-80U ballistic protection. Because even at this point, they're guessing. They do not have the full values for the T-80U. And this is a tank we know that they got from the Russians and we believe was in its top brass. We believe that this is a full-on T-80U with all the bells and whistles attached, because in the 90s, my God, Russia needed money and they were trying to sell whatever they could to pretty much everyone. They leased, as I said, 2 T-80Us to the Swedish. You can find it in this right here. It's all sat here. So because of that, with the T-80U, already was sat on flimsy data. They did not test the actual vehicle. They did not get proper representations. What they did instead is a thing called Svenskt Skid, Swedish protection. They built it themselves on what they believed the armor was, and that is what they tested. Now, if you're okay with that, because of the idea of well, it's as good as we can get, go ahead. I'm not. That's just not how my brain works. So the other thing that we need to mention is in this new set of tests, what was actually tested in 1993 and 1994. Well, they tested the Leclerc, the Leopard 2 improved, the Leopard 2 Swedish version, I suppose you'd call it, and also the M1A2. There was also a Freedom of Information put in. It's not actually called Freedom of Information, it's called RFI, which is a request for information from the Challenger 2. There was a request for information asked in 1991 and 1992 for the Challenger 2 from Vickers Defence, the Leclerc from Giat, the Leopard 2 Improved from Krauss Maffei, that was who I was trying to think of, the M1A2 Abrams from General Dynamics, and the idea was, hey, could you give us some information so we can test it and we can work on through it, we can work on from there. The Challenger 2, the reason why it didn't join these trials was because Vickers themselves was still testing the damn thing in 1993 and 1994 and were not happy with the fact that they were still testing it and the Swedish wanted to test it as well. The Leclerc, which was sent over to the Swedish tests, was in fact a prototype Leclerc and not the actual Leclerc, which was in service in 1993. It was seen as too immature is the word that was used, and this basically means that it wasn't battle hardened, it wasn't battle ready. They weren't sure whether it would be, as good as the other vehicles. The Leopard 2 improved. They sent at least one of them over to be tested. Once again, we do not know if it was an export model or not. My guess is it would have been, because it would have been the basis for them buying it. And then General Dynamics with the M1A2. Now this is where it gets interesting. So the M1A1, we know that they didn't test the armor on it, and if they did, it was an export model. The M1A2 that was sent over to Sweden was an export M1A2. The reason I know this is for many different reasons. So the first one is this. The Leopard 2 improved, had the best ballistic protection from the front, protection against enemy shelling, and was also provided with additional protection on the tower roof. M1A2 had ballistic protection in export version. Shooting attempts against its best ballistic protection were made in the United States. Otherwise, the survival capacity of the M1A2 was good when the ammunition stored separately from the crew. So the one which was used in the Swedish test, the one which was used to test its armor, which is the hotly debated thing when it comes to this project, is on an export version. If you want a picture of what they tested, it is this. This is the hull of the M1A2 that they tested. And you can see here that it's a ballistic hull, and also on top of it, Swedish add-on armor. They didn't test it with Chobham. They didn't test it with DU. This is effectively useless if we compare it to the vehicles that we have in game. And on top of this, they did not test the M1A1. I don't know how anybody could be happy with this test and say that it is anywhere near what the M1A2 would be. And because of that, if you take that this test is not okay, why are you okay with using the other tests as well, not knowing whether they are export vehicles or not knowing what happened? The fact is, if this is the test for the M1A2, which we know is an export version, because you know why, on top of all of the evidence that I've given you already. The whole point of this project was for the Swedish to work out who they were going to buy from and who they were going to upgrade. They were going to buy exported versions of tanks and upgrade them. Strv 122 is a literally upgraded version of a Leopard 2. Why the hell would America send a fully fledged MBT into a situation where they know they're not even going to buy it? They're going to buy the exported version. General Dynamics sent a damn exported version without any of the bells and whistles and naked Abrams, as I like to call it. And you are using this for data. Using this to work out the true values of vehicles. This is ridiculous. Just think about it. Think about it for 2 seconds. The export version of the Abrams is what Sweden wanted to buy. What they wanted to do is they wanted to buy an export version of a vehicle and then upgrade it with its own armor. You can literally see from these tests that's what they're doing. They're taking what is the exported version of the hull of it and adding on their own armor to see what is effective. You cannot use these, even if the values shown are correct. You cannot use these for actual sources of the non-exported vehicles. And if the M1A2 ever comes to the game and it has these armor values, then all I can say is what the hell? Because the whole point of it is, as I said, it's an export version. And if you're okay with putting export versions in trees where they weren't exported to, since they were literally made for those trees, fair enough. Once again. And if you're in that camp, well, it's the best we've got. Fair enough. But I'm not. Moving on. So, we are a little bit through. Not really a lot. So the reason why they tested MBTs in Sweden was obviously because, they were going to be used in Sweden. It's kind of as simple as that. And they wanted to do combat trials. We actually have a breakdown of the trials themselves if we want to have a look. And here we go. So you had stage 1, which was in the winter trials in the upper Norland. It was accessibility in snow, 48-hour battle dungeon, passage of Nordlandsalvar and snow barriers with a cold start. Stage 2, BT shootings on Skvod. Then you've got shootings with simulator, with stationary and moving trolley against stationary and moving target during daylight and in the dark. Then you got stage 3, which is observation experiments in Skvod, observation from stationary and moving carriage against different types of targets during the daylight and the dark. Then you've got stage 4, or Shif 4, shooting with training and combat ammunition at Ravlunda, shooting with stationary and moving trolley against stationary and moving targets during daylight and in darkness. Then you got stage 5, leadership attempt at Ravinge, which is comparative trials with and without lead support in daylight and in darkness, accuracy targeting, 48-hour battle day at Rinkeby, and country road march to Skvod. Then you got stage 6, Barmark attempts in Skvod, accessibility to different types of substrates, back, obstacle, and dike making ability. Then you've got stage 7, which was the maintenance function analysis in Skvod and in France. So the measurement of times for carrying out repairs, requirements for maintenance, and also test equipment. So you can see that they went through the whole hog of these vehicles. They were able to test their maneuverability, their speed, their armor, their ballistics, all of this stuff, right? But the question is, were they exports? And the answer is yes. Right, let's move on to some other slides which people use as evidence for armor values, which makes no sense. So you basically have, a general overview of what the trials showed. You've got examples of the MBT trials. These will have been done on that stage 6 that it talked about. And then, of course, you have, placing in the different categories, what is good and what is not. The Leclerc had 14, the Leopard 2 Improved had 7 in total, and then the M1A2 had 9. So the M1A2 in these small tests actually did better than the Leopard 2 Improved. Remember, the Leopard 2 Improved is the prototype version of the 2A5. So even then, it cannot be used for values for the 2A5 that we have in game. Ridiculous. Anyway, so the two that qualified were the Leopard 2 Improved and the M1A2, and the Leclerc unfortunately did not qualify, so therefore it was basically between the M1A2 and the Leopard 2 Improved. One prototype vehicle in the form of the Leopard 2 Improved, which was also an export version. Then on top of it, you had the M1A2 Abrams, which was also an export version. Once again, they're trying to buy these things. They're trying to buy export versions. This is not hard to understand. So the Leopard 2 Improved, we have these wonderful graphs. Now, these are interesting because half of them are in English and half of them are in Swedish. What does paket mean? Paket is packets or armor package, sorry. So the Leopard 2A4 that was tested had the armor package B, and then the improved one, which is just a Leopard 2A4 with the triangles on it, the prototype for the 2A5, had the B armor with the D2 module on the front of it. Now, what is interesting about this is, according to these charts, which, if you want to believe them, if you don't want to, this one is missing any type of confidentiality thing. It's literally just plonked there. This has secret stamped on it twice, but for some reason it's in English. I have no idea why it would be in English unless this was from the American point of view or something like that. But just understand, I'm not really critiquing whether this is real or not. I'm just critiquing if it is real, this is why we can't use it, right? So they tested it in two ways. And very similar to the TADU, they ran some simulations. So you have the Swedish solution and the German solution for the Leopard 2 Improved turret. And the Swedish solution actually did better than the Leopard one. So this would be the Swedish solution, which was the Swedish add-on armor packages that they used instead of the German one for the improved one. So overall, the Swedish one actually did better the majority of the time than it did than the German one, which finally led to the STRV-122. Then, of course, you have this document as well, talking about the ballistic limits of it. Once again, Swedish or German, depending on what you wanted to do. And then, of course, the Strv 122 ballistic protection. This was what was able to outdo the Leopard 2 improved from the Germans at the time. Then, of course, we have the M1A2 Abrams. This looks a lot more realistic to everything. You know why this doesn't really make a lot of sense, though? If you have a look at the turret side and the ammunition area, is this, once again, an export version of the Abrams that we're looking at? Yes, it is, because it makes no sense not to be. As you can see, here are the armor tests that they did, so therefore you can see there is a lack of any of the actual armor which is used by the Americans. This is a mock-up of the export version of the M1A2 with added Swedish armor. On top of it, the turret itself as well has no... I don't know how much I have to... I don't know how much I have to stress this, right? The actual M1A2 that was used by the Americans has DU armor on it. It also has Chobham inside of it, right? The export version does not. That's how you can tell the difference. That's why it's a naked M1A2. So the tests that they did here, and just by looking at these pictures, you can already tell it is to do with an export version of the vehicle. Just by looking at this area here, you can tell. So this is already void from any discussion to be used for the proper version of the M1A2. On top of this, as you can see, we have this wonderful thing from FMV. And as you can see, it has a nice stamp on it, looks very official, wonderful stuff. What does Svensk Skid mean? Svensk Skid means Swedish protection. So this is what the export model of the M1A2 is, just by itself, standard. This is it with the Swedish armor package added. Now remember, the Swedish armor package was designed for two things. It was first designed to make it so the Swedish would be able to take an export model and try and replicate the amount of armor which the other top tier MBTs had. So we're talking about the M1A2 proper Abrams, the Challenger 2, the Leopard 2, but what they didn't know was the full values of them. So they tried their best to mimic what you would find on the M1A2. Or they tried to add it to what they wanted, which is a much more plausible thing, because that's exactly what they did with the Leopard. So what you're seeing here is an export M1A2's turret, plus an export M1A2's turret with added Swedish armor. Neither of these can be used as a source for the actual M1A2. Then we have the next one, same deal here. Then we have the Leclerc, and the Leclerc is all over the place. So basically what they did with the Leclerc is they didn't really test the armor on it. Instead, they took values from the French and basically said that they were going to add these Swedish ballistic protections on it. As you can see here, the idea was to replace all plastic boxes around the turret, like these areas, with the real protection modules, which were tested here. And they once again made a simulation of how good the Leclerc's turret is. And it actually turned out the Leclerc's turret is worse than the Leopard 2 improved, and also pretty much worse than the M1A2. What a weird world we're in. And once again, what they tested was a prototype Leclerc. It was not the fully fledged in-service Leclerc at the time. So you have a test of a Leopard 2 improved, which is literally a prototype 2A5, so it is not the same as the one we have in game. Then you have the AMX Leclerc, which we don't have in game, but if it ever does come to the game, this is a prototype version of it, written here that it is a prototype version. Then on top of it, you have an exported M1A2, which is nowhere near the armor values that it should be. I would say none of these are anywhere near the armor values that it should be. And on top of all of this, they didn't even test the T-80's armor. They tested its mobility in against the M1A1, the Leopard 2A4, and the STR V104. Why the hell is anybody using this for anything? Why? By the end of the trials, the Swedish realized that what they wanted was to import a bunch of exported versions of Leopard 2s. The Americans actually offered them a bunch of M1s with the 105s, but they didn't want to take them because they had the strict idea that they wanted a 120. After these trials were completed, or at least near the end of these trials, when they were finally getting and wrapped up, the T80U turns up. So they do mobility trials on it, and you know the reason why they didn't finish the trials and why they didn't do all of these ballistic trials, and there's no there's no statistics on its ammunition or anything like that, because they never finished the trials with the T80U, because they'd already made the decision, they'd already signed on the dotted line with these lads to buy the Leopard 2s. That's the reason. It's all here. Has nobody read any of this? It's not hard to do. And this is what annoys me about the whole thing. I've spent a month going over everything I can find. And that's including classified stuff. Working out what's going on here. And working out why these tanks are being so misrepresented compared to their normal values. And the reason is because people are quoting them when it's not true. They're the wrong versions of the vehicles that you are looking at. Now let's see if there's anything else to go over. Oh, here we go. So another thing that you can also tell is one of the cool things about this website, so this is the SPHF, which is the foreign test vehicles in Sweden. They keep account of all of the foreign vehicles that they test, and General Dynamics also does the same thing. So you can actually see one M1A2 Abrams was sent. This was in 93, 94. Then the M1A1s, which I believe were in 1990. And they all have specific numbers on them. As you can see, Strv Mil Regiment number. They were all returned to the, to General Dynamics in America. And on General Dynamics, after requesting stuff from General Dynamics and asking them information, they also talked about how these were export models because that's what the Swedish were looking to buy. Right, moving on. So a lot of people bring this up as a standard thing. We've already shown why it isn't good, right? Exports, prototype, prototype, simple as. Then you have them, they decided to buy 120 new Leopard 2 improveds, so the prototypes, and upgrade them with their Swedish armor. So that's where the Strv 122 comes around, and also they bought a bunch of 160 Leopard 2A4s from Germany. They leased them. So the only real question in my mind when it comes to all of this, because everything else has been answered by either talking to people who are involved in the project or going through all of the different things, reading the books, going through all the data. The only thing that sticks in my mind is the Leopard 2A4 that was tested, was that an export version or was that an in-service German version, right? Because that's all I don't have an answer to. Everything else in my head makes complete sense apart from that bit, right? And once again, I just have to stress, it doesn't matter how good of an ally you are to a nation, you still have state secrets. You still have many things that you do not share with that nation, especially when they're not part of NATO and they also have the ear to the Russians. It is as simple as that. But yeah, I hope in this video that I've gone through the issues that I personally have with using this as a source. I think it's a horrible idea because there are so many problems with it and so many falsehoods that people are using that it's just, I know for a fact, is going to annoy me over the next few years, hearing about how certain specific pieces of armor are wrong and how, the test showed this and, everything showed that. We don't even know fully what was used to fire at these vehicles, apart from this. Let's see. We have the DM-33 against the TADU, and then we have all of these here, the threat stuff, but once again, we don't know the full values of said protection. Do we know that the Leopard 2 Improved has exactly the same armor as the 2A5? No, we don't. Do we know that the 2A4, which is touted in game to have, does that have the same values as the 2A4 with the B armor package that we have here? We don't know. On top of this, the TADU, which was not fully tested and only tested against one round. Are you okay with putting your reputation on one source? Because that's all that is happening here. And if you want to do it, fine. I'm not. I'm just not. I don't know how else to put it. So, as I said, hello Bernard. I hope I've painted a picture here. I really do. And why I am skeptical about this whole thing, and why it worries me that people are using it as fact. Because there's too many inconsistencies, there's too many weird things about it, and we've had no official responses about anything. If this video disappears, and the Swedish government takes it down, then fair enough, maybe there's something to it. But after looking at a bunch of other stuff online, I highly doubt it. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next time. I'd just like to thank Nick Graham, Dyslexic Child, B. Young, and Blackie for supporting me on Patreon.